So, Boko Haram has slaughtered nearly 400 civilians in northern Cameroon since January last year. Well, that's the conclusion of a report by Amnesty International, which was published today. The rights group accuses Boko Haram of war crimes and of causing untold fear and suffering to the civilian population there. But it goes on to say that a heavy-handed and inhumane response by the security forces in Cameroon has added to the violence and the brutality. Well, Cameroonian security forces have raided villages, destroying homes, killing civilians and detaining over 1,000 suspects, some of them as young as 5 years old. Amnesty is claiming today that serious incidents have not been effectively investigated, including one where at least 25 people died in custody. Well, joining me to discuss all of that, including the Amnesty report, of course, in more detail, is the security and terrorism expert David Otto. Very good afternoon to you, David.
Well, thank you very much.
It must be very disheartening for Amnesty International to go there and do a series of reports and find out all of this dreadful information and nothing be done about it, because I mean they've contacted the Cameroonian authorities and the Cameroon president and they haven't even bothered to reply.
Well, this is a very difficult situation for the Cameroonian government and particularly for the Cameroonian military and security forces, because what you have is a repeat of what we had in Nigeria between 2013 and 2012 and 2013, where the military would act in a way that violates human rights. It is very difficult for the Cameroonian government to have a response to this without doing proper investigation. But what you have is the fact that the military is not working in coalition with the communities. And what that happens is where there is that gap between the military and the community, you would have situations whereby innocent people will lose their lives. So it is a very difficult situation for the Cameroonian government to respond to this Amnesty report without doing proper investigation.
And this whole thing is really a spillover from what's happening with Boko in northern Nigeria, and in fact almost a carbon copy, because the Nigerian military and security forces were accused of what the Cameroonians are being accused of.
Exactly, and as you exactly said, this actually happened between the years 2012 and 2013. And what happened at that time was that the community decided to form the Civilian Joint Task Force, which is now responsible for reporting information back to the military. That you don't have that kind of force in Cameroon. So what you have is the military is fighting against a faceless organization like Boko Haram. It's impossible for them to tell who is a member of Boko Haram within the community and who is not a member. So when they get ambushed by Boko Haram militants, what they do is they go into the villages. Once they do not get the identity of whoever does it, it becomes a violation of human rights, because people are killed without any proper checks.
You have read the report, as have
Yes.
I,
Yes.
and some of the incidents are beyond the pale.
Of course, yes. You always have this kind of incidents where you're facing a terrorist organization which is faceless. No doubt, it doesn't just happen in Cameroon or Nigeria, or it also happens, with Western states like United States of America. It happens in Israel. So you have all these organizations and all these countries who fight against terrorist organizations, commit human rights violation. But the peculiarity is, whether investigations or whether there's going to be a responsibility on the part of the Cameroon government to say we would investigate, these allegations. Once they accept to investigate the allegations, that is a way forward. But you always have this kind of violations when you're fighting an organization like Boko Haram.
We were going to try to talk to our correspondent and anchorman Charles Aniagola a bit later in this program,
Okay.
but just in case we don't get him back,
Yes.
let's chat about Nigeria for a minute or two.
Yes.
What do you think of the possibility, at least, of President Buhari and his people actually negotiating with Boko Haram? It seems to me to be a catch-22 situation.
Yes.
they're in, because they're talking about Boko Haram want one specific man released, and this is a bomb maker. So if he is released for the Chibok girls, say, this guy will go on to make bombs and kill hundreds more people, one would have thought.
Yes, I mean, what we have to take into this consideration is the fact that Boko Haram does not just want one particular individual. There's, as I said before, and I've said this in this program before, there are so many groups that represent Boko Haram. So it is very difficult for you to say you would negotiate with one particular group and then all of a sudden all the other groups will follow. But what you have to do is to have a comprehensive understanding of who actually you're going to speak to. Now that Boko Haram is affiliated to ISIL, the situation becomes even more complicated because Boko Haram is not independent on its own. It has now become the Islamic State of West African province. So even if you negotiate with one of the groups, claiming to be talking on behalf of Boko Haram, what happens to the affiliation with ISIL? So it is very difficult for the government to say, we would be negotiating with a particular group, for a particular individual, and then all the Chibok girls will be returned,
Sure.
because it's virtually impossible, because most of the Chibok girls are already dead.
Yes,
so it will be impossible.
Or dispersed.
Or dispersed, or married off, and there are claims, and there are, from very local contacts that some of the Chibok girls have now been turned into terrorists. So you have a very, very complicated issue at hand. So just to say you will negotiate with a particular group or a particular individual, without looking at a holistic measure,
Sure.
it is a very difficult situation.
Is it even right? Is it wrong for the government to even indulge in this kind of conversation? Because as we were hearing from Charles there, the parents of some of the Chibok schoolgirls, their hopes are raised and then dashed again, and it happens again and again.
Well, the only thing that keeps the human mind going is the idea of hope. So once the government, is prepared to say to the people, we are ready to negotiate on behalf of, just to get the Chibok girls out. A lot of people find this as a hopeful way of going about things. But the strategy has to be different because, the government has to show that it has a proper framework on which it wants to negotiate on. Without that framework, it's quite impossible for you to just negotiate,
Sure.
with the terrorist organization.